Good evening, and tonight I will be discussing when advising does and does not work. And this is an oral presentation associated with Communications 125 at Community College of Denver. My name is Lauren. I'm here with my Communications wingdog Dot, and we're going to talk about advising. Um, First of all, we're going to talk about the definition of advising. What is advising? Secondly, we'll give examples of when advising works and when it doesn't, and discuss elements of why these examples are successful or not. And finally, I will conclude with just elaborate on how advising is not as easy as we all think. First of all, let's talk about the definition of advising. In our book, the author says, when approached with another's problem, our typical tendency is to respond with advising, which they define as to help by offering a solution. Oxford English Dictionary defines advising as a verb, basically offering suggestions about the best course of action to someone. Now, I'll elaborate. Sometimes the best course of action to someone can be a little problematic. Let's be honest, and let's go into the examples, and that'll help kind of clarify those things. First of all, I'll talk about when advice did not go over well, and I think we've all had experiences with advice not going well, mainly coming from our parents. Um, in this case, I'll just use an example like several eons ago when I was applying for schools. They gave the advice that you really shouldn't go to that school in Northern California. Nobody takes it seriously. It's populated by hippies. What are you thinking? Now, first of all, the biggest thing about the success of advising is whether or not it was even needed or asked for. My parents didn't, I didn't ask for that advice. They just gave it to me randomly. And so it was not in the right sequence. It was not in a proper context. It was not part of a dialogue where I felt like I was listened to. And it was extremely judgmental. So, those are kind of reasons why that advice didn't go over very well. The second thing, another important element is when you give advice is, are you an expert? Can you actually speak from experience? They cannot. They never lived in Northern California. They visited. They don't know the community. So really, they couldn't really give true advice on that decision. And finally, that advice didn't go over well because it was not presented in a sensitive manner. When advice feels like judging and diminishing its audience, it very rarely goes over well and is adopted. Now, here's an example of how advice is successfully adopted. At my first job, again, eons ago, I was having some issues with an older colleague. There was kind of a communication disconnect between generations. And so my boss, who is very, very much vested in my success, gave me the advice of be respectful to the people you go up as you go up the ladder, because these are the same people you're going to probably meet going down the ladder. Bottom line is, kid, it's a small world, and it's not worth, getting into a fight with a crotchety old guy and ruining your reputation, given that you have such a bright future ahead of you. Now, the advice was wanted because I approached her and I wanted to resolve this issue with this older colleague. Was it given in the right sequence? Absolutely, because she heard my concerns and understood the context in which I was working within, and the advice was taken to heart, and I still work by it because she was a trusted person. She was a leader in the organization as well as the industry, and is today. So those are some elements where advice is successfully given, um, and now you can kind of understand the difference between advice given in a helpful and constructive manner and advice given in a judging and diminishing manner from those two examples. Now, finally, in conclusion, let's talk about how advising is not as easy as it seems. Advice could totally be given in a non-proper context. You may not have the full story. Let's be real. We self-censor ourselves. Sometimes we want to look like the good guy. Sometimes we don't tell people the full story. So be careful when you advise people because you may be not privy to all the background and the context in which you're commenting on. The other thing is that sometimes, let's be honest, we can get a little full of ourselves, and advice can sometimes be given in a less respectful, caring way. This is all about tone. When you give advice, give it in a non-judgmental and compassionate way. Otherwise, it comes off as condescending, diminishing, judging. And finally, even if somebody asks for advice and it seems like it's an open opportunity to be helpful, sometimes that's not what they want. Sometimes, even though that person says, well, what do you think? What they're really looking for is either A, validation, or B, an opportunity to be heard. And a great example is when you go to the mall and your best beloved comes out of the dressing room wearing this fantastic dress and they ask, what do you think? Now that's not a solicitation for advice. That's for looking for validation. They're looking for, honey, you look fabulous. So keep in mind that sometimes what seems like a request for advice may not be. So with that, that is the end of my presentation. I thank you for your time, and I hope you have a fabulous evening. The biggest thing about helping others and communicating is by far and away be the best present and compassionate listener and always come from a place of love. I'll see you guys later and have a great evening.